Hey friends, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby and today I'm going to be doing my February wrap-up. In the month of February, I read a total of 16 books. It was a pretty good reading month for me all around. I read a little bit of manga, I read a lot of romance novels. I read so many romance books this month. This month, if you missed it on my channel, I was working on 2 different reading vlogs during the month. So one, I did a whole video dedicated to reading romance. If you missed it, I'll have that link down below. And then I also did do a readathon vlog for the Blackathon readathon, which is hosted by my friend Jessie over from Jessie on YouTube. And so I'll have that vlog linked down below if you missed it as well, but that was a vlog where I was reading books by Black authors for that week, and that was also a really fun vlog. I also, if you missed it over on my Patreon this month, I did a really fun video with my mom where we did a little bit of baking and kind of like a Q&A video with questions that were submitted by my Patreon. That was also really fun, and that video was like 40 minutes long. Like, it was very chaotic. Things didn't go exactly to plan, but it was a really fun time. And so now on to the 16 books that I did read this month. I will start with the manga because I did read 5 different mangas this month. I was actually participating in my friend Gavin. He hosts this Patreon exclusive readathon called The Geekend that's all about, you know, like reading manga and like graphic novels and anything that's considered like geeky over a weekend. And so I was able to participate in that, and I read 5 mangas over the course of that weekend. Some of the mangas that I read include Blood on the Tracks. I did read volumes 6 and 7, and Blood on the Tracks is getting so freaking good. Like, I cannot wait to read volume 8 because of the way that volume 7 just ended. I was like, bitch, excuse me. Blood on the Tracks is fucking fantastic. I think if you really like any kind of like horror or thriller stuff, I think Blood on the Tracks is definitely worth checking out. And this one, you know, as I say every time I talk about this series, it reminds me a lot of Bates Motel. You know, it has those vibes with like a creepy mother-son kind of bond, but this shit is just taking it to like a whole nother level. Like, I am getting so disturbed and so uncomfortable by what I'm reading, but like in the best way. And I literally cannot wait to get my hands on volume 8. Like, oh my gosh, this shit is getting crazy. I think I gave both of these volumes 4 stars. And then I also have been catching up on the Sweat and Soap series. I recently just read volumes 7 and 8 during that weekend, and these were also both 4 stars for me. I just absolutely adore this manga series so much. I feel like this couple, they give me major like Kath and Levi vibes from Fangirl, like if I had to describe it, because she's, you know, pretty awkward and she has her little glasses and she's just so adorable. And then he just, I don't know, he reminds me quite a bit of Levi from Fangirl as well, and they're just so freaking cute. I love the way that they communicate when they're having any kind of problems, and like their relationship is just so wholesome and so cute. And so this manga series just makes me happy. I highly recommend checking it out. And then I also was finally able to read Given Volume 1, which this is a manga series that I've had my eye on for quite some time. Like, I've been really excited to read the series for a long time, and so I finally decided to pick up Volume 1, and I really am enjoying this so far. This one is kind of about this group of boys who are starting a band. Well, there's kind of already a band formed, and then there's this new boy that's going to be joining their band, and one of the guys is kind of like teaching him like how to play guitar and all this stuff. It is so cute so far. I'm really liking the characters and the vibes of this first volume alone already. I think I gave this one 4 stars as well. Again, the manga has just been going very well for me. Like, I'm really enjoying all of the manga that I'm reading, so I can't wait to read more from this series soon. And then for the books that I read this month, I read a total of 11 books, but I did have 2 DNFs this month. The first DNF that I had was Someone Had to Do It. I kind of touched on this briefly in the Blackathon reading vlog that I did, because I did get, I want to say I got 150, maybe almost like 200 pages into this before I DNF'd it, but I just wasn't as, like, I don't know, I was afraid that this book was going to put me in a reading slump basically, and it was just not exactly what I was looking for in a thriller at the time. But this is one that I think maybe I will return to at some point in the future. And then I also did end up DNFing Burn Town by Jennifer McMahon. This was actually a book that I was reading, well, actually both of these books were books that I was reading for my Patreon prompt jar this month. With this one, I was reading this one because I chose this as a book. Like, the prompt was to read a debut book from an author, and so I definitely did complete this prompt. I just didn't do it with this book, but I did read another book this month that was a debut from an author, so I did check off that one. But then this one, Burn Town, I was reading this one for the prompt that was, you know, something of read a book from a favorite author that you have no desire to read or something like that. And so this was the book that I had chosen chosen for that because I had heard of Burn Town, but I never had any real desire to want to pick it up. And it is from a favorite author though, because I do love Jennifer McMahon. And so I thought I would give it a shot, and I got about 30% of the way into this audiobook before I just realized I have no urge to want to pick this book up again. And it just, I don't know, again, it was one of those things where I was afraid it was about to put me into a reading slump, and so I just decided to DNF it for now. I don't know if this is a book that I'm interested in reading though in the future. It just really wasn't gripping me. But like other Jennifer McMahon books, this one does have, you know, that trope of like there's a past timeline and a present timeline, and it kind of jumps back and forth a little bit. But I just found that I wasn't immediately invested in the characters, and I just wasn't really gripped by the story right away. So it was a DNF for me, sadly. On to the books that I did read this month. The first book was Twice in a Lifetime. This is a romance book that I actually buddy read with my friend Brittany, and this is kind of like a light sci-fi kind of romance story. It honestly kind of reminds me of one of my favorite mangas, Orange. Like, it has very similar, you know, plot and like themes happening in this book, which I really enjoyed. But in this story, we're following this woman who she gets a text from a man who's like claiming to be her husband, and she doesn't know who he is. And then he sends her a picture of their wedding day, and she's like, what the fuck is going on? And she kind of starts to realize that this man is like texting her through time. Like, he's literally going through time and texting her from the future, and it's just so cool. I absolutely love, like, I feel like I'm discovering this year that one of my favorite genres or tropes, or I don't know what this would be called, is when there's like a light sci-fi book and it has to deal with like a romance and people like connecting with each other through time to try and figure out a way to be together. Oh my god, I'm obsessed. It's so good. And this book was freaking adorable. Like, there were so many things that I loved about this book. I feel like not only was the chemistry between these two really good in this book, but also just the protagonist, like the female protagonist in this book. She was so freaking relatable with her talk about, you know, depression and anxiety and like all of these different things she was going through. I also do want to mention that there are some pretty intense trigger warnings in this book for those kinds of things, as well as like suicidal thoughts, suicide, you know, those kinds of things. But also this book was just so good because not only were the main characters like really good and well fleshed out, but also the side characters, because the dude love interest in this book, he has like the cutest male friends that are like together in this book, and they were just, oh my god, they were precious. And this book was just so freaking cute. I will say the ending was like a little bit disappointing for me. Like, I wasn't obsessed with the ending, so I ended up giving this one 4 stars, but I still really enjoyed my time reading this. I do think this one is also a debut from an author as well, and I will definitely be checking out anything this author writes in the future. Like, I would love for this author to write a sequel about the side couple in this book. Like, I was dying, they're so cute. And then the next book that I read this month was The Reunion by Kayla Olson, and this one is one that I was excited about because it involves these 2 actors who were on this show when they were younger. That was like a really popular show that blew up, and they played love interests on the show, but they always had this like will they, won't they kind of thing happening between them. And then now the show's having a reunion. I want to say, like, is it 10 years later? Oh no, it's 20. Okay, well, it's 20 years after the show's premiere. And so now it's been, all this time has passed, right? And now it's like, will they or won't they again? And it's almost like, I don't know, this one, I guess it kind of reads like Second Chance in that way, because you don't really know the history between these two. And I feel like that's why I ended up not really enjoying this one as much as I expected to, because I ended up giving this book 2 stars, and it was mainly because I couldn't really connect with the characters. I just didn't really care about their relationship or what was happening, because as much as I love the idea of like, you know, there was this really popular show and they gained all this popularity, like, I love reading about actors. I always say this, but then I feel like most of the time I end up disliking the books that are about actors. I'm like, I always say I love reading about them because I do, but then for some reason, I'm always disappointed by them. But I don't know, I feel like I just didn't connect with this story. I didn't connect with the characters, and I feel like it was something about the second chance romance aspect of it, because I don't usually like second chance romances, because I feel like because we don't see the beginnings of the relationships, it's hard for me to get invested and to care about them getting back together. And so that's kind of where this one fell flat for me. I just thought it was fine. I don't know, it was 2 stars for me, not very memorable at all. Unlike the next romance that I read, which was X's and O's by Amy Lee, which this one, apparently it's a sequel in like a romance series, but I have not read the first book yet, so oops. But this one was really interesting because we're following this protagonist named Tara, and she runs a bookstagram and a book talk account, so she's literally like a book influencer, so she was very relatable for me. I don't think I've ever read a character quite like her. And then it's interesting because she becomes roommates with this guy living in Boston who's a firefighter. Like, okay, It's interesting because the premise of this book is that, you know, she's starting to think about all of the exes that she's had in her life so far, and she's thinking maybe like she's grown a lot in the last couple of years and maybe they deserve a second chance to see if something can like spark again between them. So the whole premise of this book is that she's, you know, she writes down a list of like all of her exes that she's had, and she's like reaching out to them again and trying to reconnect with them again and go on dates again. And then, you know, a lot of them really epically fail because she's dated a lot of total douchebags. It's kind of like one of those things where you go out on all these dates with these guys, but then you end up always going back home to him because you're meant to be with him. And it's so fucking soft. Oh my gosh. Okay, this book was so top tier for me because I love the roommates to lovers trope. Is one of my favorites, like top tier trope for me. And these two were so freaking cute. I loved their banter throughout this. My freaking girl Tara over here, she's also a really big Swiftie, and the amount of Taylor Swift references in this book just had my heart freaking soaring. It was really great. I love the inclusion of that. I don't know, this book was just so fun. It was like exactly what I needed when I'm like looking for a rom-com. Like this is exactly the kind of book that I crave when I want a rom-com, and I can totally see myself rereading this in the future. I ended up giving this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. Like I really enjoyed it. There was like some little things about the ending that got a little like cheesy and like but besides that, I'm obsessed. It was so freaking cute. I loved it. And then I also read during that romance reading vlog, I finally read Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. And this is a book that I've been hearing so much incredible things about that I was kind of scared to read it, you know, because as I said, the second chance romance trope is usually not my favorite. And this book definitely has that because in this book, we're following a couple who was married previously and they have children together. And then this story is about how now they're at a point in their lives where he has a new girlfriend and she's just getting kind of like about it, a little jealous, and then it's kind of about how they're trying to like reconnect and like fall back in love with each other again. I feel like this book is absolutely deserving of all of the hype, and this was such an emotional book. I don't know why. I was not expecting this book to be as emotional as it was for me, because when you find out, you know, some of the reason as to why they got divorced in the first place, it is just absolutely heartbreaking, and it just really like pulled on my heartstrings. And I also just love the discussion in this book about grief, you know, and about like mental health and depression and how, you know, your life can really change when you grieve something in a certain way. And also the discussion about men going to therapy in this book was also very well done, I thought, and very beautiful to see, because I feel like there's still a lot of, you know, stigmas in our society about men going to therapy and how sometimes people think that that makes them weak or like whatever the fuck they want to say about men going to therapy. But I love the discussion in this book, and I appreciate, you know, seeing in this book the men going to therapy and like talking about their feelings. I just thought it was all so beautiful and so well done. And even though I'm not usually a fan of the second chance romance trope, oh my gosh, I was so obsessed with these two. Like these two were so freaking cute and it was so beautiful. Like every time they were like nearing getting back together, I was just like, my heart was racing. I was like, yes. And so I had a wonderful time reading this. This was a 5-star romance for me. I definitely see why this book is so highly praised and so highly talked about, because it really is deserving. Like it's so well written. It's so good. It has great characters. I just loved it. I had a great time reading this. And then another book that I did read for that romance reading vlog was Sorry Bro. This one is a female-female romance that follows an Armenian American woman, our protagonist. I love like the idea of a female-female romance being called Sorry Bro is just absolutely hilarious to me. And you know, this story was really interesting because it talks a lot about how this Armenian American woman is struggling with her, you know, sexual identity because she doesn't know exactly where she falls. And I do mention this quite often too, about how I just love stories about people kind of discovering or exploring their sexuality a little bit later in life. I don't think I've ever read a book, to be honest, that follows an Armenian main character, and so just that representation alone I really appreciated in this book, because I feel like I not only learned so much about like their culture in general, but also I feel like there was a lot of history talked about in this book as well that I was not aware of. But I also feel like at times this book was a lot heavier than I was expecting it to be, because, you know, you go in really thinking this is going to be like a rom-com, but I think because of these, you know, connections with how like queer people aren't always accepted in Armenians' culture and different things like that, I feel like it made this book a lot heavier than I was expecting it to be. And at times I just felt like the tone of the book was like all over the place, because at times it would be really heavy and like really depressing, and like some of the stuff they were talking about was really sad, but then at other times it would feel so lighthearted and so fun. And so some of the tone was like a little bit hard for me to like keep with, because the tone was shifting a lot throughout the story. And then there was a conflict at the end of this book that I was just not happy about. Like, I don't know, if I was this other girl and the way that this main character handled this one situation, it was just very icky, and I just don't know if I'd be so willing to forgive her the way that, you know, this girl does. I don't know, like the whole third act conflict just made me super like, ooh, yikes. I feel like overall this was a 3-star book for me. Oh my gosh, I mentioned this too in the romance reading vlog, but the way that the sex scenes were written in this book was just very odd to me. It's written in a very like closed door way where like you don't really get to see or know anything that just happened. But the way that it was written, I thought it was so confusing. It was almost like there was like a scene missing from the book or something, the way it would jump to like the next moment, and you were just like, wait, did I miss something? Because they would talk about it, but like you didn't get to see it. I don't know. It was written in a way that just made me really confused and kind of like wanting more out of those scenes. I don't know. This was fine. It was a 3-star for me, but honestly, it was pretty forgettable, sadly. And then the next book that I read was the first thing that I read for the Blackathon reading vlogs that I did, and that was Fake It Till You Bake It, which this one is another romance. This was actually one of the buddy reads for Blackathon. And in this story, we're following this woman named Jada, who she was recently on a show that's kind of like The Bachelor, where like a guy proposed to her on this show and she turned him down. And so now she's like America's biggest villain because she turned down this man on television, and so she's kind of like wanting time out of the freaking spotlight of like all the media attention, and she just wants to do something different. And so she gets this job working at a bakery that's owned by an NFL player. Like, okay, let's go. And his name is Donovan Dell, and he lives in San Diego. Like, Donovan Dell? Like, I don't know, he just has the coolest name I've ever freaking heard, and I love the name Donovan so much. And so there's also like a fake dating element to this, right? Because the photographer that sees them, he like assumes that they're dating, and then they think, oh, maybe this would actually be better for both of our careers if people think that they're dating, because then she becomes less of a villain to America or whatever, and then he gets some promotion for his bakery because of the drama there. And so they decide to fake date as well. And like, I love the fake dating trope. The fake dating, it's right up there with the roommates trope for me. Like, I love fake dating and I love the roommates trope. Those are my top tiers. And so I was really enjoying this. I also love, you know, the whole thing of like baking. Like, anytime baking is involved in a book, it just makes it feel so much more cozy and more fun. And so I had a great time with this. I ended up giving this one 4 stars because, again, there was something about the third act conflict in this book that was just a little bit cheesy. I feel like sometimes it can be so hard for authors to like perfectly nail that third act conflict, but it means so much to me as a reader that like I need that third act conflict where they're like, there's something that prevents them from being together forever. I need it to feel realistic, and I need it to be like, oh my gosh, like, you know, interesting. But sometimes I feel like authors just don't, like, sometimes they drop the ball at that part, and I feel like this one kind of did for me. So it was a 4 star, but I still really enjoyed it. And then another book that I read for that vlog was Sweet Hand, which this one is actually another romance book that also involves baking. I know, I didn't even plan this, and I did not even realize that both of these books I was gonna read them like almost back to back. This woman named Charisse, and she has recently dealt with a very public breakup because she was with this guy who is a musician, and he cheated on her, and then they had this very public and dramatic breakup, you know? And so she's kind of going through it right now, and she kind of doesn't want anything to do with men, especially musicians. But it's so cute because she has to go to her younger sister's wedding, and you know, the wedding, it's gonna be happening on this like island, and she runs a bakery called Sweet Hand, and then so she's gonna be the maid of honor, and then this guy who she cannot stand and who's also a musician, he's going to be the best man in the wedding, and so they're gonna have to like be forced to be around each other a lot of the times. But this book was so freaking cute. Oh my gosh, not only because the wedding vibes, okay, the wedding is another thing that I love in romance books. I don't know what it is. I love when there's like a wedding atmosphere happening, so I loved the wedding vibes. I also loved the hate to love. Oh my gosh, like their banter was on point. And again, the baking, oh my gosh, this just checked all of my boxes with things that I really love in romances. I also, I just especially love the male love interest in this book. His name is Kieran. There's something revealed about his character a little bit later on in the book that just, it made me love his character even more. And I don't know, their chemistry was just so good. Like, I feel like out of all the romance books that I read this month, I want to say that these two had like the best chemistry. Like, my heart was like racing, like giddy the whole time. time. And so yeah, I really freaking enjoyed this one. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I found so many new favorite romances this month. It literally makes my heart so happy. And then for that reading vlog as well, I also ended up picking up The Getaway, which this one is a new young adult dystopian horror thriller type of story. And in this book, we're following this protagonist named Jay, who is a teenage boy, and he works at this resort in their small town where there's these people that are going missing at this resort. And it's not just like a person goes missing, it's like an entire family goes missing. And they're like, what the fuck is going on? And something that I didn't realize about this book right away when I was reading it is that, you know, this book takes place in the year 2000, which I was like, oh, that's a really interesting choice. But then I didn't realize for some reason in my head that this is a dystopian book. So it's not exactly like our year 2000, because in this world that, you know, these characters are living in, they're dealing with like severe climate change. Like their climate is very different and very, like, even worse than ours. It's basically like our world, but just slightly more terrible. And then they also have like extreme meat shortages and like food shortages and, you know, things like that. So like they're living in a world that is very similar to ours. It's just a little dystopian. Like if things were a little bit worse than they currently are, we could very well be living in this world, you know? And this book was interesting, even though I did have some issues with it. I mean, my main issues with it was the pacing of this book. I wasn't the biggest fan of, because I thought it started out like really slow, and then the timeline of this book was a little bit confusing to me, because sometimes it would have a chapter that would be like 3 years ago, and you would jump back in time 3 years, but then it wasn't clear to me like when it would go back to the present day, or not the present day timeline, but like 3 years ahead. And so I was just a little bit confused at times, like where we were supposed to be in the timeline. And then also another like nitpick of mine is like the young adult kind of romance that was happening throughout this book was just a little cheese for me. Like I didn't need the romance element in this book, and I feel like that's my issue so often with some young adult books, is that they feel a little too young for me, which I know is not like a real critique, because like I am not the targeted audience anyways for this book, and I understand that. But this one did read a little bit young for me at times. But I will say that this author does a really great job with the social commentary in this book. It almost kind of feels like a Black Mirror episode, you know, where he's so easily able to connect these themes and these things happening in this scary ass dystopian book and connecting it to our world and our society and pointing the finger back at us and being like, look at yourself. You know, like I really love the way that this author was able to do that, and I would definitely read more from this author in the future. Like I think this was a really solid book. I think I ended up giving it around 3 stars. Of the direction of like where this story ended up going, I was pretty surprised by the gruesomeness of like some of the scenes towards the end of this book, because since it's young adult, I never know like just how dark a certain book will get, but this one was a little bit surprising there, so this book definitely gets credit there. And then I ended up reading the book Nana by Brandon Massey, which was the Book Troop Book Club pick for the month of February. I actually recently just did a live show with Jesse and Jan, so if you missed that, I'll have it linked down below. But the live show was very fun, because this book, oh my gosh, this book, I was like, when I was reading this, I was like, what the fuck did I just get us into? Because in this story, we're following this woman named Grace, and she is claiming to be the birth mother to this woman named Monica, who's recently just lost someone who's like a mother figure in her life. And when she's at the funeral, you know, this woman Grace shows up and she's like, I am your birth mother. And then she ends up moving in, you know, with Monica and her husband Troy. And immediately things start to get weird, you know, because it seems like Grace is somehow getting younger, and it seems like Monica is like aging really quickly. Like her hair starts turning gray, and she feels like she's like getting really tired all the time. And it's very, very creepy and very weird. Honestly, I can see why a lot of people were saying that this kind of reads like a Lifetime movie, because in a lot of ways, I do think that this book is like a little tad ridiculous and a little cheesy and over the top, but this was just exactly what I was in the mood for when I picked up this book. Like this book was so ridiculous and so fun. I feel like Grace is one of those characters that like, she's awful and she's gross, but like you literally can't look away from her because you're like, what is this bitch gonna do next? And I just had so much fun reading this book. Like I do think this book is a tad cheesy and a little over the top, and I can totally see why some people would absolutely hate this. Like I totally can see that, but I just had the most fun time. I feel like this book was just the perfect amount of kind of ridiculous for me. I feel like where my issue lies with this book was more with the ending. I feel like the ending of this book was just so abrupt, and not even like I wanted to get more answers, because I mean I did did want to get more answers, but also just like the ending, it was just like boom, final scene, boom, it's over, and then like nothing. And I was just like, I just needed more from that ending. And I've been debating for a while whether or not I want to give this like a 3.5 to 4 stars, but I do think I'm leaning more towards 4 stars, especially after having the live show discussion with Jesse and Jan, and they both loved it so much, and it was just a fun time. And this is definitely one that's staying on my mind a lot longer than I thought it would. You know, it's just like one of those kind of creepy paranormal horror, over the top, like really fun books, and I definitely want to be reading more from Brandon Massey because what the fuck was this book? This was crazy. I also finally got around to reading Finley Donovan Jumps the Gun. This is the 3rd book in the Finley Donovan series. I think it's the 3rd of 4. I think there will be a 4th coming. And if you didn't know my history with Finley Donovan, I was obsessed. Like I literally I think the first Finley Donovan book was in my top 3 books of that year. Like I loved the first Finley Donovan book so much. If you're completely unfamiliar with the series, it's kind of like a cozy-ish mystery thriller kind of series where we follow this woman named Finley who's an author, and one day she's like in a Panera with her agent and they're talking about her next book, which is all about murder and stuff, and this woman overhears her and she thinks that she's like an assassin, and she offers her a big sum of money to kill her husband. And so Finley gets into all kinds of crazy shenanigans because of this offer, and the book series just really takes off from there. And so this is the 3rd installment. You know, we're kind of like 3 books deep now into their story, and this book, I don't know, I feel like this one just didn't really do it for me the same as the other books did in the series. Like I don't know, I feel like this book, it was trying to be as fun and like as funny and cute and whatever as the other books, but for some reason I just found myself a lot less invested and like not wanting to pick up the book as much. Like it didn't have that same like addictive quality that the other 2 books had for me. And I don't even know if I could fully explain why that is. Like, I don't know if I've just become like less invested in the story over time, or if I just don't care about the particular plot that's happening anymore. But like, I do love these characters with my whole heart. Like Finley and Vero, I freaking love them. I could read about them all day, honestly, but there was just something about this story that just didn't really invest me. I also think, you know, like there is a love triangle that's happening throughout this book series, and the love triangle is just not really panning out how I'm wanting it to. Like, what the heck? And so I don't know, this one was a 3-star for me. Like I'm definitely going to continue with the 4th book and like, you know, finish out the series and see where it ends up going, but for now I'm feeling a little bit bored and a little bit underwhelmed. And then the last book that I read this month was The Book of the Most Precious Substance by Sarah Gran, and this is a book that I actually just read because it was another one of my Patreon prompt, you know, jar things this month. I think the prompt was to read a book with 7 words in the title or something like that, and so this was the book that I ended up choosing for that prompt, and bitch, am I glad. Am I so glad that I chose this book to read this month. This was such a weird book. Like I don't even know what the genre for this is. I don't know how I would even describe this to you. I think it's kind of like fantasy, magical realism, horror type of, you know, weird magical kind of thing. I don't know how to describe this, but in this story we're following this protagonist named Lily. She's kind of been going through it, you know, she's kind of having a hard time in her life right now, and she's an author and she's also a bookseller, and she gets this opportunity where there's this buyer who wants this book called The Book of the Most Precious Substance, and it's this like really unique, weird book. Like there's only a few copies of this book in the world, and the book is about sex magic and like different weird sexual things that can happen. She's trying to get her hands on this book to sell this book so that she can make like potentially millions of dollars from selling this book. And so most of this story is about how she's trying to track down this sex book, and then kind of how weird things are starting to happen to her as she's getting more involved in trying to find this creepy sex magic book. It honestly sounds so weird when I even try to explain it to you, and you're probably like, what the fuck, that doesn't even sound that interesting, but I swear this book was so interesting. The writing in this book, I mean, okay, look at all my tabs, okay? I tabbed this so much, and the writing at times was just so beautiful and so sad. Like there was a point around, it was like after page 40 when I started to really get invested in the story, and once I started realizing more about like Lily's character and her backstory, I just started to get really invested in like why she wanted to do this and like why she needed the money so desperately. And the writing itself was just so beautiful. Like it almost made me emotional at times because of the way that it was written. It was just so well done. But then also, I was just so intrigued. Like, the concept of this book, like, I usually don't care at all about like reading about anything magic or anything like sex magic, especially like what the heck. I don't know if I've ever read anything like this, but there was something so fascinating to me about this book and how it was having an effect on all of the people around it. I'm so torn because the beginning of this book and like the first 150 pages, I was absolutely obsessed and I was like 5 stars easily, like this book is fucking incredible. But then there was a point after 150 pages where I felt like the story was getting so repetitive. Oh my gosh, it was almost like 70 to 100 pages of like the same shit over and over again, so repetitive. And I was like, oh my god, I was getting so bored. I was like, is anything gonna happen? And then the ending of this book, oh dude, the ending of this book was so top tier in every way. Like, I got full body goosebumps. I like reread the last 2 pages like a few times because I was like, shit, that was so clever, so smart. I feel like this book, it also reminds me of like other things that I've loved that are kind of weird. Like, it definitely gives like the bunny kind of vibes. Loved it. It was very strange. It was very weird. It's one of those books that I would not widely recommend to a lot of people because I feel like there's only like a niche kind of specific group of people that could enjoy this because it is very weird. But like, I don't know, I really enjoyed this. I think I am gonna end up giving it like a 4.5 out of 5. I don't think, because I was so bored for a long time in this story, I don't think I can give it the full 5 stars, but I can guarantee this is a book that's gonna stay on my mind for so long, especially that ending. Ugh. Dude, every time I think about that ending, oh my god, it gives me chills. Like, this had the perfect book ending. This is probably definitely one of my favorite books that I've read this year, so if that tells you anything right there, I mean, maybe I'm just too critical with my ratings. Like, maybe this should just be a 5 stars. Like, I should just get over it. It was so good. And so yeah, those are all the books that I read in February. I'm so happy to have found so many new favorites this month. Like, these 4 books right here, these were all pretty freaking top tier for me. Like, these were all so fucking good. And so it makes my heart happy that I have found so many favorite books. Like, even though I only read 11 physical novels this month, at least like 4 out of those 11 were freaking top tier. Like, that's pretty good odds, you know? I'm not gonna lie, I'm also surprised I was able to read as much as I was this month because this month was a chaotic month for being a big BTS fan, because not only did we have the yet to come, you know, concert in cinemas, which I saw 4 fucking times. I know, I saw it 4 times. But then I also, like, this month, oh my gosh, my fave Yoongi, he announced a solo tour that's happening, which was like the most unexpected shit ever. And then Jimin announced a solo album, and then J-Hope's military announcement just came out, but then right after that he announced a single coming out in March, and we had like the last Run BTS episode in the month of February. Like, February has just been absolutely fucking chaotic to be a BTS fan, but like in the best way. I also, oh my gosh, in the month of February, like, my sister has started to get into BTS, like, for real now, and then also one of my closest friends, Brittany. And so having people now in my real life to like fangirl with has just been pretty fucking life-changing, to be honest. And so I'm honestly surprised I was able to read as much as I was, because I was just like losing my mind this whole month over BTS, and it was amazing and I wouldn't change it for anything. So, but I'm really looking forward to the month of March. I have so many exciting things planned for the month of March. Shortly after this, I'll be posting my March TBR video, which will include all of my plans for the month of March. But I am very excited. If you haven't heard yet, I did announce my first ever Patreon exclusive 48-hour readathon that's going to be happening at the end of March. It'll be happening the last weekend on the 25th and the 26th. And it's kind of like a readathon that's called Screaming Color. It's named after the song Out of the Woods by Taylor Swift, you know, like, we were in screaming color. And I think it's gonna be so much fun. It's all about reading books of a specific color on your shelf. And so for the month of March, I chose the color green. And so we're gonna be reading all the books with green just for 48 hours on a weekend. It's gonna be so much fun. Like, I'm literally so excited. But yeah, that's a wrap on February. Let me know, what did you read in the month of February? What was your favorite book that you read this month? What was your least favorite book that you read this month? Let me know all of the details. Thank you so much for watching, as always, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye.